Thessaly had not woken up that morning expecting to discover a dying king's secret, but here she was, standing in the amber glow of the mending room with his ceremonial robe pooled across the work table, her fingers tracing scratches that should not exist on the inside of royal silk. At first, she had thought it was damage. Claw marks, maybe, from a partial shift. The king was known for his iron control, but even the most disciplined wolves left their mark now and then. She had turned the lining inside out to check if the silk needed replacing before she mended the hem, and the scratches caught the light. Long, deliberate gouges scored into the inner lining with precision that no accident could explain. They were letters, old letters, not the common tongue, not the trader script the merchants used in the lower city. These were claw marks shaped into Fenrath, the ancient wolf language that had not been spoken or written in 3 generations. A dead script, a forgotten alphabet etched by claws into the king's own clothing. Thessaly's hands began to shake. She could read Fenrath because Marin had taught her years ago, when she was still a girl with thread-stained fingers and too many questions. Marin had called it useless knowledge, an old woman's indulgence, something no living wolf would ever need, but here it was, gouged into silk by someone's claws, and Thessaly's eyes moved across the marks before her brain could tell them to stop. She mends what is torn. She is the thread. Find her or we die. The room went very quiet. Thessaly stared at the words until her vision blurred and she had to blink. She read them again, a third time. The meaning did not change. Someone had written this inside the Alpha King's robe. Someone with claws and knowledge of a language that had been dead for 100 years. And the message was about a woman who mended things, a woman with thread-stained hands. Her gaze dropped to her own fingers, the permanent indigo dye beneath her nails. The calluses from years of needlework, the faint silver scars where pins and scissors had left their marks. No, that was absurd. She was reading meaning into coincidence because she was tired, and the light in here was bad, and her imagination had always been too loud for her own. Good, but the scratches were real. She could feel the ridges beneath her fingertips, deliberate and deep, pressed into the silk with force and desperation. This was not how the afternoon was supposed to go. The robe had arrived in the mending basket that morning, along with 3 other garments from the royal household. A torn hem on a formal coat, a missing button on a riding jacket, a stain on a linen shirt that someone had unsuccessfully tried to treat with salt, and the ceremonial robe, the one the king wore for court audiences. Heavy black wool lined with charcoal silk and embroidered at the collar with the Valdron crest in silver. Thread, the hem had come loose on the left side. A simple repair, 20 minutes of work at most. Thessaly had saved it for last, because she liked working with fine fabric, and because, if she was being honest with herself, she liked handling the king's things. It made her feel connected to a world she would never belong to. The closest a nameless seamstress with no wolf and no bloodline would ever get to the man who ruled the realm. She had turned the lining to check for fraying, the way Marin had taught her. Always check the lining. Damage hides where no one thinks to look. Damage hides where no one thinks to look. The mending room suddenly felt too small. The air pressed in from all sides. Thessaly set the robe down carefully and crossed to the storage shelf where the previous week's completed work waited for collection. 3 garments bearing the Valdron crest sat folded on the upper shelf, mended and pressed and waiting to be returned. She reached for the first one with hands that would not stop trembling. She turned the lining inside out. Her breath stopped. More scratches, fainter, older but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. A single word in Fenrath gouged into the silk with careful, controlled strokes. Mate. Thessaly grabbed the second garment. Another set of marks, longer this time. Near. She is near. The one who mends. Her pulse was a wild, hammering thing in her throat now. She reached for the third garment, the oldest one on the shelf, and turned it inside out with fingers that could barely grip the fabric. 3 marks, just 3, barely visible. Like whoever had made them was only just learning to form the shapes. Help. The air left Thessaly's lungs in a rush. She stood there holding a king's shirt with the word help carved into its lining, and the full weight of what she was looking at settled over her like a hand pressing down on her chest. These were not random. They were not old. They formed a sequence, a progression, growing longer and more desperate over weeks. Someone, something, had been writing messages inside the king's clothing, and not a single person had noticed. Until now, a door creaked behind her. Thessaly spun around so fast she knocked the shirt from the shelf. Dristan, the king's beta, stood in the doorway. His gaze moved from her face to the garment spread across the table, to the shirt on the floor with its lining exposed, to the claw marks catching the lamplight. His expression did not change. But his stillness was the kind of stillness that came right before something irreversible. "Close the door," he said quietly. Thessaly's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. "My lord, I can explain," she started. "Close the door, Miss Thessaly," Dristan repeated, stepping inside. "And do not speak of what you have found to anyone. Not a soul. Do you understand?" She nodded. Mute and terrified, Dristan crossed to the table and picked up the ceremonial robe. He studied the lining for a long moment, his face perfectly blank. Then something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked very much like fear. "How long have these been here?" he asked. "Weeks," Thessaly whispered. "Maybe longer. The oldest one just says help." Tristan set the robe down slowly. He looked at her, and the weight of his gaze was crushing. "Go to your quarters," he said. "Do not leave. Do not speak to anyone. I will send for you before dawn." "My lord, am I in trouble?" Thessaly asked, her voice cracking. Dristan paused at the door. He did not turn around. "The king does not know these messages exist," he said. "His wolf has been writing them without his knowledge. If what you've found means what I think it means, then no, you are not in trouble." He pulled the door open. "But you should be afraid." He left before she could ask what that meant. Thessaly stood alone in the mending room, surrounded by the king's clothing and the desperate words his wolf had carved into them, and felt the first cold wave of genuine fear wash through her body. That night she did not sleep. She lay in her narrow cot in the servants' wing and stared at the ceiling and tried to convince herself that the messages were not about her. There were other women in the palace who mended things, dozens of them. The words could refer to anyone, but her wolf, the one she had never been able to feel, the one the healers said might never wake, stirred for the first time in her life. A faint tremor deep in her chest, like a second heartbeat flickering to life in the dark. She pressed her hand to her ribs and held her breath. It flickered again. Then it was gone. At dawn, someone knocked on her door. The waiting chamber was small, stone-walled, and smelled like cold iron and candle wax. Thessaly sat on the bench with her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She had been here for what felt like an eternity, though the candle on the shelf had barely burned down a quarter-inch. Dristan entered without knocking. He looked like a man who had not slept either, though he wore the look far better than she imagined she did. "Miss Thessaly," he said, his voice measured and calm. "Thank you for your patience. Is the king angry?" she blurted out. Dristan studied her for a moment. "The king does not yet know. I need to confirm something first." He paused. "Are you familiar with wolf fracturing?" Thessaly shook her head. "A wolf and its human host share a single body," Dristan said, closing the door behind him. "They are meant to exist in harmony. One mind, two natures, working together. But when a wolf is suppressed for too long, when its instincts are denied and its needs are silenced, the bond between them begins to crack." He crossed the room and leaned against the far wall. His arms folded. The wolf starts acting independently. Small things at first. A growl the host did not intend. A flash of eyes during conversation. Reflexes that move faster than the human mind can account for. He met her gaze. And in rare cases, the wolf begins communicating on its own, leaving marks, writing messages the host has no memory of. Thessaly's stomach dropped. "That is what is happening to the king," she whispered. "That is what I believe is happening to the king," Dristan corrected. "And if I'm right, it means the fracturing has progressed further than any of us realized. A wolf that can write, that can form words and sentences and sustain them across weeks. That is not early-stage separation. That is a wolf on the verge of tearing free entirely. What happens if it tears free? Thessaly asked, though something in her already knew the answer. They both die, Dristan said simply. The wolf cannot survive without its host. The host cannot survive the severance. It is not a clean death. The room seemed to tilt beneath her. The messages, Thessaly managed. They mention a mate, someone who mends things, someone close. Yes, Dristan said. He was watching her very carefully now. And she realized with a sickening lurch that he was not confirming what she already suspected. He was waiting for her to say it herself. You think the wolf is writing about me, Thessaly said. I think the wolf knows something the king does not, Dristan replied. Or something the king is refusing to acknowledge. The silence that followed was suffocating. I need you to be near him, Dristan continued. Close enough for the wolf to sense you. If it reacts to your presence, if the fracturing slows or stabilizes, then we will know. Know what? Thessaly asked, though her voice came out barely above a breath. That you are what his wolf has been searching for. Dristan pushed off the wall and straightened. I have arranged for you to deliver a garment repair to the king's study this afternoon. You will remain in the room while he works. You do not need to speak to him or interact with him in any way. Simply be present. And if nothing happens, she asked, then we try something else. Dristan moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The king has been experiencing episodes, moments where his control slips, his eyes shift without warning. His voice drops into registers that are not entirely human. He has been hiding it from the court, but it is getting worse. He looked at her over his shoulder. If his wolf surfaces while you are in the room, do not run. Stays exactly where you are. Can you do that? Thessaly wanted to say no. Every rational part of her brain screamed no. But the flicker in her chest, that impossible second heartbeat that had stirred in the dark last night, pulsed once, warm and insistent. Yes, she said. The walk to the kitchen study that afternoon was the longest of Thessaly's life. She carried a folded riding jacket with freshly replaced buttons and tried to keep her hands from trembling badly enough to drop it. The corridors of the upper palace were quieter than the servants' wing. The stone walls hung with tapestries that muffled sound and swallowed light. A guard opened the study door without a word. King Torvain Valdrin sat behind a desk piled with correspondence, his head bent over a report. A pen moving in sharp, efficient strokes across parchment. He did not look up when she entered. He did not acknowledge the door opening or closing. The only sound was the scratch of his pen and the low crackle of the fire. Thessaly set the jacket on the side table as quietly as she could manage and retreated to the chair Dristan had told her to use. A straight-backed wooden seat against the far wall, positioned where the king could see her if he chose to look up. But far enough away to be unobtrusive, she sat. She pressed her hands together in her lap. She tried to breathe. He was larger than she had expected. She had seen him from distance before her, crossing the courtyard or mounted on horseback. But the study compressed his presence into something overwhelming. Broad shoulders that strained the seams of his shirt. Hands large enough to wrap entirely around the pen he held. Dark hair that fell across his forehead, which should have softened him, but somehow made him look more dangerous. 5 minutes passed. 10. The king kept writing. The fire crackled. Thessaly counted the beats of her own pulse and tried not to stare. Then his pen stopped. It was subtle. A hesitation, barely a fraction of a second. Like a horse stumbling mid-stride. His head tilted slightly, not toward her, but in her direction, as if catching a sound at the edge of hearing. His nostrils flared. Thessaly stopped breathing. The king's hand tightened around the pen. His knuckles went white. A low sound built in his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a breath. Something between the two that made every hair on Thessaly's arms stand upright. His eyes lifted from the page and found her. They were not the dark brown she had seen from a distance. They were amber, bright, burning. Molten amber, and they were not the king's eyes at all. They were his wolf's. The pen cracked in his grip, snapping clean in half. Ink splattered across the parchment. The king stared at his hand like it belonged to someone else. The amber bled from his eyes. Replaced by dark brown, and confusion replaced whatever had just been there a moment before. He looked at the broken pen, at the ink on his report. At her, sitting frozen against the wall. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough and slightly unsteady. "Thessaly, your majesty," she managed. "From the mending room, I delivered your riding jacket." He stared at her for 3 more seconds. Then he looked away, set the broken pen down carefully, and resumed reading as though nothing had happened. But Thessaly had seen his hand, the one that had held the pen. It was trembling. She found Dristan in the corridor afterward, leaning against the wall like he had been listening through the door. One look at her face told him everything. "His eyes changed," Thessaly said, her voice shaking. "They went amber," and he snapped his pen in half. Dristan closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the fear she had glimpsed the night before was back, sharper now. "It's you," he said quietly. "His wolf nose, it recognized you the moment you walked in." "But the king did not," Thessaly whispered. "No," Dristan agreed. And that is the problem. By evening, Thessaly had been reassigned. No formal announcement, no explanation to the other seamstresses. Just a quiet word from Dristan to Marin, and a new set of instructions that made Thessaly's stomach turn somersaults. She was to serve as the king's personal mender. His garments would come exclusively to her. She would work from a small chamber adjacent to the king's study during the hours he was present. Close enough for his wolf to sense her through the wall. The arrangement was, according to Dristan, purely practical. "He needs proximity," Dristan had said. "The wolf's episodes are getting more frequent. 3 times last week his eyes shifted during council meetings. Twice he lost time, minutes he could not account for afterward. If your presence stabilizes the fracturing, even slightly, we need you nearby as often as possible." "Does the king know why I am there?" Thessaly had asked. "He knows you've been assigned as his personal seamstress. He does not know about the messages. He does not know what his wolf has been doing." Dristan's expression had tightened, and for now he cannot know. The king's response to learning that his wolf has been acting independently would be to suppress it harder, and that would accelerate the fracturing. "We need time." So Thessaly moved into the small chamber off the king's study with a basket of mending, a sewing kit, and the distinct sensation of being a mouse that had agreed to nest inside a lion's den. The first day was agony. She could hear him through the wall. The low murmur of his voice during meetings, the scrape of his chair, footsteps that were heavier than any man's should be. She mended a torn cloak lining and replaced the frayed cuffs on 2 dress shirts, and every stitch felt electric, charged with the awareness that he was 10 feet away on the other side of the stone. On the second day, Dristan told her to work in the study itself. "The adjacent rooms is not close enough," he said, looking grim. He had another episode this morning. Growled at Counselor for Fenwick during a budget discussion. Nearly took the man's head off. "Was Counselor Fenwick hurt?" Thessaly asked, alarmed. "Only his pride." The king apologized, which somehow made it worse. "Fenwick has been telling everyone the king is losing his mind." So Thessaly carried her sewing basket into the king's study and set up in the corner by the window, where the light was best for needlework, and where she could pretend, very unconvincingly, that she was not sitting 15 feet from the most powerful man in the realm. Torvain glanced at her when she entered, a brief, flat look that contained nothing she could read. "The seamstress," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, Your Majesty. You'll be quiet?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Then stay." He went back to his correspondence. Thessaly threaded a needle and began reattaching a loose button, and for an hour, neither of them spoke. It was the strangest hour of her life. She could feel him across the room the way you feel a fire burning. Not just warmth, but presence, something that pressed against her skin and settled into her lungs with every breath. His scent reached her even from 15 feet away, cedar and iron and something deeper, something wild and animal that made the dormant thing in her chest stir and flutter. The king did not have another episode that day, or the next. or the day after that. On the fourth day, he spoke to her without looking up from his work. "You're the one who fixed the embroidery on my court robe." Thessaly's needle froze mid-stitch. "Yes, Your Majesty. The silver thread on the collar, it was coming loose for months. 3 different seamstresses attempted it before you." "They used a running stitch," Thessaly said carefully. "The original work was done in split stitch. It needed to be matched or the tension would keep pulling it apart." Silence. Then, very quietly, "How did you know the original technique?" "Marin taught me to read the thread before I cut it," Thessaly said. "Every stitch tells you how it was made if you look closely enough." He said nothing more, but when she glanced up from her work a few minutes later, she caught him watching her. His expression was strange, not hostile, not suspicious, just puzzled, as though she were a knot he could not untangle. He looked away before she could hold his gaze. A rhythm formed over the following days. In the mornings, Thessaly arrived at his study before the king did, set up her sewing station by the window, and worked quietly while he handled the business of ruling. He ignored her, mostly. Spoke to advisors and commanders and trade envoys, while she darned socks and mended cloaks and pretended to be invisible. But small things began to change. On the 5th day, a cushion appeared on her chair. She had not asked for one. The wooden seat had been murder on her back, but she had not said a word. Yet there it was, thick and well stuffed, covered in the same dark fabric as the study's furnishings. She looked at the king. He was reading a report and did not look up. "Thank you for the cushion, Your Majesty," she said. "What cushion?" he replied without raising his eyes. On the 7th day, her sewing basket was moved. She arrived in the morning to find it repositioned from the dim corner to the window ledge, where the light was stronger and fell directly onto her workspace. "Someone moved my basket," she observed aloud. "Servants," the king said dismissively, turning a page. On the 9th day, a cup of tea appeared on the ledge beside her basket, still warm, prepared with honey, which she had mentioned preferring once in passing 3 days ago, while talking to herself because she'd pricked her finger and needed to complain. To someone, even if that someone was only the air, she picked up the cup and looked across the room. The king was writing with intense focus, his jaw set, his ears very slightly pink at the tips. Thessaly bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling and sipped the tea. That evening, after the king had dismissed his last advisor and the study had gone quiet, Thessaly gathered her mending and prepared to leave. She was folding the final garment, a linen undershirt with a repaired seam, when she felt it. The fabric shifted under her fingers. Not the weave settling, not a loose thread pulling free. A texture that had not been there that morning, when she had set the shirt aside for the king to wear. She turned the shirt inside out slowly, her pulse climbing. Fresh scratches, made that day, gouged into the linen with careful, controlled strokes while the shirt was being worn, while the king sat behind his desk and read reports and pretended not to notice the seamstress in his study. The wolf had written while its host was awake. Thessaly's hands trembled as she traced the marks. Fenrath's script, the same dead language, the same desperate hand. "She is the one. Do not let her leave. We are running out of time." The shirt fell from her fingers. Behind her, the study door opened. Dristan stood in the corridor, his face grave. "Show me," he said. Thessaly held up the shirt with numb hands. Dristan read the marks, and the careful composure the beta wore like armor cracked. She saw his throat work as he swallowed. "The wolf wrote this while the king was conscious," she whispered. "While he was sitting right there, he did not feel it. He would have felt it," Dristan said quietly, the claws extending, the pressure against his skin. He would have felt it and dismissed it as another episode. Another crack he cannot explain. He took the shirt from her hands. "We are running out of time, Miss Thessaly. The message says the same thing," she said. Dristan looked at her, and the weight of everything unspoken passed between them. "Tomorrow," Dristan said, "we tell the king." Thessaly's heart stopped. They told the king on a cold morning when rain streaked study windows and the fire had burned low. Dristan did most of the talking. Thessaly stood near the door with her hands clasped in front of her and watched the king's face change. It did not change the way she expected. There was no explosive anger, no shouting, no fists driven into the desk. What happened was worse. The color drained from his skin slowly, steadily, like water seeping from a cracked vessel. His eyes moved from dry stand to the garments laid out across the desk, each one turned inside out, each one displaying the Fenrith script his wolf had carved without his knowledge or consent. He stared at the marks for a very long time. How long? He asked. His voice was controlled, but something beneath it was fracturing. At least 6 weeks, based on the garments we've recovered. Dristison said, possibly longer. Miss Thessaly discovered them 3 days ago. The king's gaze shifted to her. She held it, though every instinct told her to look away. His eyes were dark brown and steady, and filled with something she could not name. Shame, maybe. Or a terror dressed up as composure. You can read Fenrath, he said. Not a question. My mentor taught me, Thessaly replied. And what do they say? He gestured at the garments. These messages my wolf has apparently been writing while I was not paying attention. Thessaly swallowed. They mention a mate, Your Majesty. Someone nearby. Someone who mends to things. She paused. This most recent one says we are running out of time. The silence that followed was the heaviest she had ever stood inside. Then Torvain laughed. It was not a good laugh. It was short and sharp and hollow, and it made something in Thessaly's chest ache. Of course it does, he muttered. He pressed his fingers to his temples and closed his eyes. My wolf is writing love letters in a dead language inside my own clothing. And I did not even feel it happening. You felt it, Dristan corrected quietly. The episodes, the growling, the lost time. Those were the moments the wolf was surfacing. Then I will control it harder, the king said. And his voice went flat in a way that frightened Thessaly more than the anger she had been expecting. Sire, that is precisely what you cannot do, Dristan said. The suppression is causing the fracture. If you tighten your grip now, then I will tighten it, Torvain interrupted. His jaw set like iron. I will not have something inside me acting without my consent. I will not have my wolf making decisions on my behalf, choosing mates on my behalf, writing messages to women without my knowledge or permission. His gaze cut to Thessaly, and she saw it then. Not anger at her, anger at himself, disgust at the loss of control, fear of what his wolf might do next. You may return to the mending room. Miss Thessaly, he said, this arrangement is concluded. Your Majesty, Dristan started. I said concluded. The word cracked through the study like a whip. Thessaly flinched. Even Dristan went still. Then it happened. The king's eyes flickered. Brown to amber and back so fast, Thessaly almost missed it. His hand shot to the edge of the desk, gripping it hard enough that the wood groaned. A sound ripped from his throat, low and guttural and inhuman, and for one terrible second, his entire body contorted like something inside him was trying to claw its way out. He doubled over, his hands slammed flat against the desk. The tendons in his neck stood out like cords, and his breathing went ragged and raw. Torvain, Dristan moved toward him. But the king threw out a hand. Stay back, he snarled, and the voice was layered, his and not his. Human and wolf overlapping like two people speaking the same word a half-second apart. Thessaly did not think. She crossed the room in 4 steps and put her hand on his shoulder. The world went white. She was standing in darkness. Not the darkness of a room without light, but the darkness of a place that had never known light at all. The air was thick and still and tasted of iron. Beneath her bare feet, the ground was cold stone, slick with something she could not see. Hello? She called. A sound answered. Not a voice. A breath. Deep, labored, rattling through massive lungs somewhere ahead of her in the black. She walked toward it because there was nowhere else to go. The darkness thinned. Gray light filtered in from no discernible source. And Thessaly saw it, a wolf, enormous, browder than any horse she had ever seen, with fur the color of charcoal and smoke and storm clouds. It lay on the stone floor, its great head resting on its paws, its sides heaving with each slow, painful breath. Chains bound its legs. heavy iron links driven into the stone floor, wrapped around its throat, pulling tight across its chest. The wolf was muzzled. A cage of iron bars clamped around its jaws, and every inch of the restraints glowed with a faint, sickly light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The wolf's eyes found her. They were amber, bright and burning and utterly aware, and the intelligence in them, the desperate, agonized recognition, made Thessaly's knees buckle. She dropped to the ground beside it. The wolf whimpered, a sound so enormous and so broken that it vibrated through the stone beneath her. "You wrote the messages," she whispered. "You've been trying to reach me." The wolf's eyes closed. It pressed its muzzle against the stone, and the chains rattled as it tried to move closer to her. She reached for it. Her fingers brushed the fur along its neck. Warm and impossibly soft beneath the iron, and the wolf shuddered. The chains flickered, just for a moment. The sickly glow dimmed, and the iron seemed to loosen. Then a force like a wall of wind slammed into her, and she was thrown backward. Ripped away from the wolf, torn out of the darkness like a thread pulled from a seam, she gasped and opened her eyes. The king's study, the fire, the rain against the windows. Her hand was still on Torvain's shoulder, and he was upright now, staring at her with wide, shocked eyes that were fully and completely brown. "What did you just do?" he breathed. Thessaly's heart was hammering so hard she could barely speak. "I saw your wolf," she said. "He is chained, he is in agony, and those chains are yours." The look on Torvain's face nearly broke her. Something raw flashed across it, guilt and horror, and a grief so old it had calcified into the structure of his bones. Then the shutters came down. "Get out," he said quietly. "Your Majesty," I said, "get out." He pulled away from her touch like it burned. And Thessaly felt the loss of contact like a physical wound. She left, but the image of the chained wolf followed her out of the study, down the corridor, and into her dreams that night, where it lay on cold stone and breathed in slow, rattling agony, and looked at her with amber eyes that begged for something she did not yet know how to give. 2 days passed in silence. Thessaly was not summoned to the study. No garments arrived in her basket. The seamstresses whispered about her sudden reassignment and equally sudden removal, and she deflected their questions with vague answers about scheduling changes and tried not to think about amber eyes and iron chains. On the third morning, Dristan found her in the mending room. "He wants to see you," the beta said. Thessaly's hand stilled on the fabric in her lap. "Why?" Dristan hesitated, which was unusual enough to make her stomach clench. "The fracturing has accelerated since you touched him," he said carefully. "The wolf is more active now, not less. The king had 4 episodes yesterday. He lost nearly an hour of time." "That is not my fault," Thessaly said, though guilt twisted in her chest regardless. "No one is saying it is. But something shifted when you made contact. The wolf tasted proximity to you, and now it is fighting harder to get free." Dristan paused. "The king has agreed, reluctantly, to allow you back into his presence. But there are conditions." "What conditions?" "You will be present during the evenings, in his private chambers." Thessaly's face went hot. "Not like that," Dristan added quickly. "The fracturing is worst at night. His wolf fights hardest when his conscious defenses are lowered by fatigue. Your presence seems to calm the wolf. Even through a wall, we need you close while he sleeps." "He agreed to this?" Thessaly asked, disbelieving. "He agreed to not dying," Dristan replied dryly. "The rest he is tolerating with very poor grace." That evening, Thessaly stepped into the king's private chambers and tried very hard not to look at the bed. She failed. It was enormous. Dark wood frame, dark coverlet, dark pillows arranged with the rigid precision of a man who controlled every detail of his environment, because the alternative was losing control entirely. A narrow cot had been set up near the far wall. Thin mattress, single blanket, one pillow that was barely more than a folded cloth. "That is yours," Torvain said from the doorway behind her. And Thessaly jumped hard enough to knock her hip against the bedpost. She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression she could not decipher. "Your Majesty," she said, pressing a hand to her racing heart, "you startled me." "You are in my bedroom," he observed. Yes, you seem uncomfortable. I am extremely uncomfortable. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite softness, but the hard edges blurred for just a moment. That makes two of us, he said quietly. They established terms quickly. She would arrive after the household retired. She would stay on her cot. He would stay on his bed. There would be no contact, no conversation beyond what was necessary, and absolutely no touching. The last time you touched me, something happened, Torvain said. And the careful precision of his words told her he had been thinking about it obsessively. Something I cannot explain and do not wish to repeat. So your hands stay on your side of the room. Understood, Thessaly said. He extinguished the candles. She lay down on the cot, which was even more punishing than it looked, and stared at the ceiling. Minutes crawled past. She could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate, the breaths of a man forcing himself toward a sleep he did not trust. She could smell him everywhere, wood smoke and steel and wildness, soaking into her lungs with every inhale. Then she heard something else, a scratching sound, faint and rhythmic and coming from his direction. Thessaly's blood went cold. She turned her head slowly. In the dying firelight, she could just make out the king's form on the bed. He was asleep, or nearly so, his body still, his breathing deep. But his right hand hung over the edge of the mattress, and his fingers were moving. No, not his fingers, his claws. They had extended in sleep, dark and curved, and they were dragging slowly across the wooden bed frame, carving grooves into the surface with the same deliberate, controlled strokes she had seen inside his clothing. The wolf was writing, right now, while the king slept 3 feet away from her. Thessaly lay perfectly still and watched, her heart in her throat, as the wolf used the king's own hand to carve a message into the wood. She could not read it from this angle. She would have to get up. She would have to move closer. She would have to look. Every rule Torvain had just set said stay where you are. She got up anyway. She crossed the 3 feet between her cot and his bed on silent feet and crouched beside the frame. The firelight caught the fresh grooves in the wood, and the Fenrath script was raw and ragged, carved by a wolf working through a sleeping body with limited time and desperate urgency. She is fading. Her wolf has never woken. If the bond is not sealed, she will be hollow forever. Save her. I am begging you. Save her. Thessaly rocked back on her heels. The message was not about the king. It was about her. She looked up. Torvain's eyes were open. He was staring at her, fully awake, and his gaze dropped to the claw marks in his bed frame, to his own extended claws, to the horror dawning on his face as he realized what his wolf had done while he slept. Then his gaze returned to her face, and what she saw in his expression made her wish she had stayed on the cot. "What does it say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Thessaly swallowed hard. "It says my wolf has never woken, that if the bond is not sealed, I will be hollow forever." Her voice cracked. "It is asking you to save me." The silence lasted a lifetime. Then Torvain pulled his hand back, retracted his claws with visible effort, and sat up. "Leave," he said. "Your Majesty, please, you need to leave this room." His voice was rough and shaking, and she could see Sugal playing out across his face, the wolf pushing forward, the man shoving it back. "You need to leave this castle, tonight." "What?" Thessaly stared at him. "My wolf is fixated on you. It has decided you are its mate, and it will not stop until it has you. Do you understand what that means?" He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, putting distance between them. "It means every moment you spend near me, it gets stronger. Every moment you spend near me, it takes more of my control. And if I lose control completely—" He stopped, his jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle jumping. "People die when I lose control," he finished. "That has already been proven." Thessaly felt the words hit her like stones. "I am not afraid of your wolf. You should be." He turned to face her, and his eyes were bright with something terrible. "My wolf killed 17 people the last time it broke free. 17. Some of them were enemies. Some of them were not. And I could not stop it because I was not there. I was gone, buried inside my own body, while my wolf tore through everything in its path." The confession fell between them like a blade. "That is why I chained it," Torvain said, his voice dropping. That is why it must stay chained. And you standing here, smelling like you do, looking at me the way you are looking at me right now, you are the key it has been searching for. If I let you stay, it will use you to break free, and I cannot allow that. Even if the chains are killing you both, Thessaly whispered. Especially then. He moved to the door and held it open. Go home, Miss Thessaly. Forget the messages. Forget what you saw in the dark. And do not come back. Thessaly stood in the middle of his chambers, her chest cracking open, and looked at him holding the door like a man bracing against a flood. She left because he was the king and he had commanded it. But she made it only as far as the corridor before the tears came, hot and blinding, and behind her she heard a sound that stopped her dead, a howl. Low and long and devastating, muffled by stone walls but unmistakable. The wolf, trapped inside its chains, crying out as she walked away. And deep in Thessaly's chest, in the place where her own wolf had never lived, something answered. A flutter, a pulse. A sound too faint to be a howl but too real to be imagined. Then silence. 4 days without him, and Thessaly was coming apart. It started small. A headache that would not lift. A tightness in her chest that made deep breaths feel like swallowing glass. She told herself it was stress. Exhaustion, the aftermath of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about a king who did not want her worry. By the second day, her hands trembled too badly to thread a needle. By the third day, the light hurt. She worked with the curtains drawn, squinting at stitches she could barely see, and snapped at an apprentice who dropped a spool of thread. The girls startled. Wounded expression made Thessaly hate herself, but the apology that followed felt like pushing words through wet sand. By the fourth day, she could not get out of bed. Marin found her curled on her side, shivering despite the blankets piled on top of her. Her skin clammy and her pulse thin and rapid. How long? Marin asked, pressing the back of her hand to Thessaly's forehead. 4 days, Thessaly whispered. Since he sent me away. Marin's expression tightened. She pulled a chair beside the cot and sat down heavily. Tell me everything, she said. So Thessaly told her. The messages, the wolf in chains, the vision she had seen when she touched the king. The claw marks in the bed frame, the confession about the 17 dead. The howl that followed her down the corridor, and the answering flutter in her own chest. She told Marin about the flutter most of all, because it had not come back, and its absence felt like a death. Marin listened without interrupting. When Thessaly finished, the old seamstress sat in silence. For a long time her weathered hands folded in her lap. Marin had never been just a seamstress. In the years after finding Thessaly's wrappings, she had studied everything she could about wolf bonds and the old ways, consulting healers and scholars and anyone who would share what they knew about the ancient scripts. She had prepared for this moment for 23 years without ever being certain it would come. You should have told me sooner. Marin said finally. There was nothing to tell. He does not want me near him. His wolf does. His wolf is chained inside him, and he will die before he sets it free. Thessaly's voice cracked. And apparently I will die with him. Which seems tremendously unfair, given that I did not ask for any of this. Marin reached for her hand. Child, do you know why I taught you Fenrath? Thessaly blinked, thrown by the shift. You said it was useless knowledge. I lied. Marin squeezed her fingers. You were left on the castle steps as a newborn, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with Fenrath script. I was the one who found you. I was the one who read the message stitched into your wrappings. The room seemed to lose its edges. What message? Thessaly breathed. Guard her wolf. It sleeps, but it will wake when it finds the one it was made for. Marin's eyes glistened. I taught you the old language, because whoever left you wanted you to be able to read the signs when they came. And they have come, Thessaly. They have come written in claw marks inside a king's clothing, and you cannot ignore them simply because the king is too stubborn and too guilty to see what is right in front of him. Thessaly stared at her, tears sliding down her temples into her hair. My wolf, she whispered. It stirred. Just once. The night I found the first message, and again when I walked away from his door, but then it stopped. It did not stop. Marin said firmly. It is waiting. It has waited your entire life for its counterpart. And now that it has found him, the distance between you is smothering it before it can fully wake. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. If this goes on much longer, your wolf will die without ever opening its eyes. And you will live, but you will live hollow, exactly as the king's wolf warned. And the king? Thessaly asked. Marin's mouth thinned. The king's wolf has been fighting the chains for over 2 years. The fracturing is accelerating. Dristan estimates he has weeks, perhaps less, before the severance becomes irreversible. What happens then? Then the wolf dies inside him and takes half his soul with it. He will survive. Technically, his heart will beat, his lungs will fill, but the man you know will be gone. What remains will be something diminished, something broken in a way that cannot be mended. Marin held her gaze. And because the bond between you has already begun forming, incomplete as it is, his destruction will cascade into yours. Your wolf will never wake. The hollow place inside you where it should live will collapse, and you will carry that emptiness for the rest of your life. Thessaly closed her eyes. The ceiling above her was spinning even with her lids shut. He told me his wolf killed 17 people, she said quietly. He is terrified of it. He believes the chains are the only thing keeping everyone safe. The chains are the thing killing him, Marin replied, and his wolf did not kill 17 people. His wolf defended him against an ambush during the Greymark campaign when he was outnumbered and seconds from death. The wolf broke free because it had to, because the alternative was dying in a ditch with a sword through his chest. Were there casualties beyond the enemy combatants? Yes, a field medic. 2 supply runners who were in the wrong place. That is the tragedy he carries, and it is real, and it is awful. But it was not slaughter. It was a wolf saving its host's life in the only way it knew how, and Torvain has been punishing it ever since. He does not see it that way, Thessaly murmured. No, Marin agreed. He sees a monster in chains, and he believes the chains make him noble. But the monster is half his soul, and the chains are killing you both. A knock sounded at the door. Dristan stepped inside, took one look at Thessaly on the cot, and the pole he always wore slipped for just a moment. How bad? He asked Marin. Bad enough, the old woman replied. And the king? Dristan's jaw tightened. Worse. 3 episodes today. The last one lasted 11 minutes. He could not shift back for nearly a quarter of an hour. His claws stayed out, his voice was layered, and he did not recognize Counselor Fenwick at all. He looked at Thessaly. He also has not slept in 4 days. Since he sent me away, Thessaly said. Yes. The 3 of them sat in the weight of that truth for a long, heavy moment. He will not let me come back, Thessaly said. He ordered me to leave the castle entirely. He ordered a lot of things, Dristan replied. He also howled for 40 minutes after you left his chambers. I could hear it from the east corridor. Thessaly's throat constricted. The king believes he is protecting you, Dristan continued. He believes his wolf is dangerous and that proximity to you will trigger a full break. He is wrong, but he is the king, and telling a king he is wrong requires a certain amount of strategic maneuvering. What kind of maneuvering? Thessaly asked. Dristan looked at Marin. Marin looked at Dristan. Something passed between them. An understanding built on years of working around a man too proud and too guilty to accept the help he desperately needed. The kind where you show up in his chambers uninvited, Dristan said, and refuse to leave until he listens. He will be furious. Thessaly whispered. He will be alive, Marin corrected. Thessaly lay on her cot, sick and shaking and terrified, and thought about a wolf in chains carving desperate messages into silk because it was the only voice it had left. She thought about her own wolf, stirring once, twice, then going silent in her chest like a candle flame smothered before it could catch. She thought about living the rest of her life with that silence inside her. When? She asked. Dristan almost smiled. Tonight, he said. The corridors were dark and quiet when Thessaly made her way through the upper palace. Dristan had left a guard at the stairwell with instructions to let her pass, and the man stepped aside without a word. Though his eyebrows climbed halfway up his forehead when he saw the state of her, she knew how she looked. 4 days without proper sleep, barely eating, her skin pale and her hands shaking. She had dressed in clean clothes and pinned her hair back, and that was the most she could manage. The door to the king's chambers was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was cold. The fire had burned to embers, and no one had stoked it. The curtains were drawn, and the air smelled stale and heavy, like a room that had not been properly opened in days. Torvain stood by the window, one hand braced against the frame, his forehead pressed to the glass. He was still dressed, though his shirt was untucked and wrinkled in a way she had never seen on him. His hair was disordered. His shoulders, those impossibly broad shoulders that usually carried the weight of a kingdom without visible strain, were bowed. He heard her enter. She saw his back go rigid. "No," he said without turning around. "Yes," Thessaly replied. He turned then, and the sight of him stole her breath. The hollows beneath his eyes were deep enough to cast shadows. His skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of sustained, grinding exhaustion. But his eyes, those dark, proud, furious eyes, were burning. "I told you to leave the castle," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You did, and yet here you are, in my chambers, again. Here I am." He pushed off the window frame and crossed toward her, and even diminished, even wrecked with sleeplessness and guilt. The sheer physical force of him made the air feel thin. "Do you understand what you are risking?" he demanded. "Every moment you stand here." My wolf claws closer to the surface. I can feel it right now, pressing against the inside of my skull, trying to get to you. If it breaks through, then let it, Thessaly said. He stopped, 3 feet between them, close enough to touch. Close enough that his sentient wrapped around her, and the hollow thing in her chest pulsed with faint, desperate warmth. "You do not know what you are saying," he growled. "I know exactly what I am saying." She stepped closer. He did not step back, though she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "Your wolf did not murder 17 people. Your wolf saved your life during an ambush that would have killed you. The people who died, the medic, the 2 runners, their deaths were a tragedy. But they were not a massacre, and you have been punishing the part of yourself that kept you alive, because the guilt of surviving was easier to carry than the grief of accepting what happened." His face went white. "Who told you that?" "Marin, who heard it from the field reports. Who has been watching you destroy yourself for 2 years and could not say a word because you refused to listen." Marin does not understand. Torvain started, but his voice was fracturing. "Then help me understand," Thessaly said, and she reached for his hand. He caught her wrist before she could make contact. His grip was firm but not painful, and his fingers were trembling. "If you touch me," he said, and his voice dropped to something raw and exposed, "I will not be able to let go." "Good," Thessaly whispered. "Because I was left on the castle's steps as a baby, wrapped in a cloth with a message stitched in Fenrath that said my wolf was sleeping and would only wake when it found the one it was made for." Her voice broke. "It stirred for you. For the first time in my entire life, something inside me moved, and then you sent me away, and it went silent, and I have never felt so empty." His grip on her wrist loosened. His thumb shifted, tracing the ridge of bone beneath her skin, and the touch sent a shock up her arm that settled deep in her chest. "I can feel it dying," she said, tears sliding down her face. "The wolf I never got to meet. It is dying because you will not let yours reach it. And I am so tired of this emptiness, Torvain. I have been hollow my entire life, and for one moment, just one, when I stood next to you, I was not." His composure shattered. He pulled her against him so hard the breath left her lungs. His arms wrapped around her, crushing her to his chest, and she felt him shaking, his whole body trembling with the effort of holding back what he had been fighting for weeks. "I can hear it." He breathed against her hair. "My wolf. It is screaming your name. It has been screaming your name since the moment you walked into my study with a basket of mending, and I could not understand why the air that suddenly smelled like home." Thessaly pulled back just enough to look at his face. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and the amber was bleeding through at the edges, his wolf pressing forward. And for once he was not fighting it. Then stop running. He kissed her. His mouth came down on hers like a man breaking the surface after too long underwater, desperate and gasping, and full of need so raw it made her knees buckle. She grabbed the front of his shirt and held on because the world was tilting, and the only solid thing left was him. He lifted her without effort, without breaking the kiss, and carried her to the bed. The bed where his wolf had carved messages into the frame while he slept. The bed she had knelt beside reading desperate Fenrath script by dying firelight. "I am terrified," he confessed against her temper, "of what happens next, of what my wolf will do. Your wolf has been trying to save you," Thessaly whispered, pulling him closer. "Let it." What followed was theirs alone, a claiming and a surrender all at once, tender and fierce and achingly honest. And when the mating bite came, instinctive and inevitable, the bond ignited. It roared through her chest and tore open every hollow place and filled them with light so bright. Could not breathe. She marked him in return, claiming him as hers, and felt the answering shudder move through his entire body. The bond locked into place. 2 heartbeats became 4, his and hers, wolf and wolf, and in the deepest chamber of her chest, something opened its eyes for the first time. Her wolf drew its first breath. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever felt. They lay tangled together afterward, his arms around her, her head on his chest, both of them breathing hard and dazed and unwilling to let go. His hand traced slow circles on her back. Her fingers rested over his heart, feeling the steady double rhythm beneath his skin. "I can feel you," he murmured, wonder coloring his voice. "Inside, like a thread running through the center of me. I can feel you too," Thessaly whispered. "Both of you." He pressed his lips to her forehead and pulled her closer, and sleep took them both. They woke in the dark. Thessaly opened her eyes and knew immediately where she was. The stone floor, the iron-tasting air, the absolute, suffocating darkness that preceded the gray, the wolf's prison. But it was different this time. The darkness was not as thick. A faint golden light pulsed at the edges of her vision, warm and alive, and she realized it was coming from her, from the bond, glowing beneath her skin like embers sewn into her veins. Torvain stood beside her. She felt his hand find hers in the dark, and his grip was tight. "You are here," he said, and she heard the fear in his voice. "I brought you here. I pulled you in." "We pulled each other in," Thessaly corrected. "The bond connects us now. Where you go, I go." The gray light filtered in slowly, revealing the space she had seen before, the stone floor, slick and cold, the vast emptiness stretching in every direction, and in the center, the wolf. It was worse than the first time. The great charcoal body was thinner, the ribs visible beneath the matted fur. The chains had tightened, the iron links digging into muscle and bone, the muzzle pressing so hard against the wolf's jaws that dark marks stained the fur beneath it. The sickly glow of the restraints pulsed in a rhythm that matched Torvain's heartbeat, because the chains were his. Every link forged from his fear, his guilt, his refusal to forgive the animal that lived inside him. The wolf's amber eyes opened when they approached. It saw Torvain, and a low, broken whimper escaped its muzzle. It saw Thessaly, and its tail moved once, a weak thump against the stone. Torvain stopped walking. Thessaly felt his hand go rigid in hers. "I did this," he said. "I put these chains on it." "Yes, because it killed those people." "Because you were afraid of what you could not control," Thessaly said gently. "And the guilt gave you permission to be cruel to the part of yourself that needed you most." He flinched. She felt it through the bond. A searing flash of shame so intense it nearly buckled her. 17 people, he whispered. 3 innocent lives lost in the chaos of survival. Thessaly said softly, "And you have grieved them every single day since. That is not the mark of a monster, Torvain. That is the mark of a good man carrying a wound he will not let heal. I lost control. You were dying. Your wolf refused to let that happen." She stepped in front of him, placing herself between him and the chained wolf. "Look at what your punishment has done. Look at it. Your wolf carved messages into your clothing, because it was the only way it could scream for help through the chains you wrapped around it. It wrote in a language no one has spoken in 100 years, because it was that desperate, and every message said the same thing. Please, help. Find her. Save us, Torvain's eyes filled. I was left on the steps of a castle wrapped in old cloth, Thessaly continued. And her own tears were falling now. No name, no family, no wolf. I grew up believing I was deficient, broken, less than everyone around me, because the thing that makes our kind whole never woke inside me. I spent 23 years thinking I was born incomplete. She squeezed his hand, but I was not incomplete. I was waiting. My wolf was waiting for yours, and yours has been reaching for me through iron and silence and dead languages, carving love letters into silk because you chained its mouth shut, and it had no other way to speak. The wolf whimpered again. Its amber eyes moved between them, and the intelligence in that gaze was staggering. This was not a beast. This was the other half of the man she loved, loyal and fierce and desperate and dying on a cold stone floor because he could not forgive himself for surviving. You have to choose, Thessaly said, turning back to Torvain. I cannot break these chains. They are yours. Your guilt, your fear, your punishment. Only you can release them. Torvain stared at the wolf. The wolf stared back. What if it happens again, he asked. And his voice was small in a way she had never heard from a king. Then I will be there, Thessaly said. The bond means I can reach you, both of you. If your wolf ever loses itself again, I will find it and bring it home. That is what mates do. A long, trembling silence. Then Torvain knelt. He reached out with shaking hands and touched the iron muzzle clamped around his wolf's jaws. The moment his fingers made contact, the chains pulsed, resisting feeding off his doubt. I am sorry, he said to the wolf. I am so sorry. You saved my life and I caged you for it. The wolf's eyes closed. A tear, impossible and real, slid down its muzzle. I forgive you, Torvain whispered, and I am asking you to forgive me. The chains shattered, not slowly, not link by link, but all at once, exploding outward into fragments of light that dissolved before they hit the ground. The muzzle cracked and fell away. The links around the wolf's legs and chest and throat disintegrated into golden dust that swirled upward and vanished. The wolf surged to its feet. It was enormous, bigger than Thessaly had realized, towering above them both, its fur rippling from charcoal to deep silver as health flooded back into its body. It threw its head back and howled, and the sound was not grief. It was joy. The howl shook the stone beneath their feet. It cracked the darkness open like an eggshell, and light poured through, warm and golden and blinding. The wolf turned to Thessaly and pressed its great forehead against her chest, and the impact of it, the gratitude, the love, the desperate relief radiating through the bond, brought her to her knees. And inside her own chest, answering the call, her wolf rose. It did not stir, it did not flutter, it rose, full and fierce and completely awake, flooding every hollow place inside her with warmth and strength, and the bone-deep certainty that she had never been broken. She had been waiting, and the wait was over. Thessaly gasped. Torvain caught her, pulling her against him as the light consumed everything, the stone, the darkness, the prison that had held his wolf for 2 years. They woke in his bed, in his chambers, in the warm amber glow of a fire that someone must have stoked while they slept. Torvain was holding her so tightly she could feel every beat of his heart. His wolf's heartbeat and her wolf's heartbeat pulsed alongside their own. 4 rhythms woven together into something whole. He looked down at her with eyes that were brown and amber simultaneously. Human and wolf, no longer at war. Thank you, he breathed. Thessaly smiled through her tears and pressed her face into his chest. And they held each other until the dawn came through the curtains and painted the room in gold. The healing was not instant. Torvain still woke some nights with his hands clenched and his breathing ragged. The memory of 3 people who had died in the wrong place, at the wrong moment, sitting heavy on his chest. He did not try to chain those memories or bury them. He spoke them aloud in the dark, and Thessaly listened. And her hand in his was enough to keep the guilt from swallowing him whole. He shifted again after 2 years on a cold morning in the courtyard, and the sound Dresden made when the enormous silver wolf appeared was something between a laugh and a sob. The wolf bounded across the frost-covered stones like a creature half its age, and when it circled back to Thessaly, it pressed its nose against her palm and huffed warm breath across her fingers. Thessaly's own wolf woke fully over the following weeks. Her first shift was clumsy and ungraceful, and she got tangled in her own dress, which made Torvain laugh so hard he had to sit down. Her wolf was small and dark-furred and quick, and it fit against the king's silver wolf the way a needle fits a thread. The court's reaction to a nameless foundling seamstress as the Alpha King's mate was predictable. Whispers followed her through every corridor. Glances slid sideways at banquets. A counselor whose name she would not dignify by remembering called her a stray to her face. And Torvain's response was so swift and so devastating that no one attempted it again. They will adjust. Torvain told her on the night of their bonding ceremony, pulling her close in the privacy of their chambers. And if they do not, they can take it up with their king, who happens to be hopelessly in love with his seamstress. Your seamstress, Thessaly corrected, smiling against his chest. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, Thessaly sat by the window in the king's study with her mending basket in her lap, replacing a button on Torvain's riding jacket. Habit made her turn the linings inside out to check for damage. The silk was smooth, unmarked. No scratches, no claw marks, no desperate messages carved in a dead language by a wolf that had no other voice. She ran her fingers across the clean, unblemished lining and smiled. Across the room, Torvain looked up from his correspondence. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," Thessaly said. "Just checking the lining." He watched her for a moment, and something soft and knowing moved across his face. Then he returned to his work, and Thessaly picked up her needle, and the afternoon light fell warm across them both.